At Our Wits End. It's about dysgenic trends throughout the first world, the second world, even parts of the third world, that we're getting stupider every generation. The book posits that we're losing somewhere between 0.1 and 1 full IQ point every decade. Over to you, Kevin.
The book just recently published is called At Our Wits End, and it's by Edward Dutton, who I learned today is now a YouTube star, and
Yes.
Michael Woodley. And this book is easy to read. Anyone of decent intelligence is not going to have any problem with the concepts in the book or in the way that they are described. If you violently hate the idea of IQ, well, this book is not for you. I suppose some people might be persuaded by its arguments in favor of IQ, but I'll mention, there's other arguments again. Even if it's true, we shouldn't pay attention to it, which I'll get to. The book begins, it's incredible to think that in the year 2000, you could get from London to New York in just 3.5 hours. These days, it takes longer than that to fly from London to Athens. With the advent of Concorde in 1969, we had dealt with an extremely difficult problem, how to get from A to B much faster. We'd been trying to solve this problem since 1954, and the solution was Concorde. It was a minor update to existing technology, which made things slightly easier, like the introduction of active power steering in BMW cars in 2003. This was a major breakthrough, comparable to the invention of airplanes themselves, how can we fly, or the spinning jenny, how can we massively speed up production. In the 1950s, some of the world's most intelligent and creative people were put to work to find a solution, and on March 2nd, 1969, Concorde was in the sky. A Concorde crashed on 25th July 2000 in Paris. It promptly smashed into a hotel after takeoff, killing all 100 passengers, 9 crew, as well as 4 people on the ground. The crash was essentially due to incompetence. A titanium wear strip had been attached to the back of the the thrust reverser of a Continental Airlines DC-10 airliner as part of an operation to repair it. Not only was the wear strip badly produced, but it had not been made by the airliner's original equipment manufacturer. Accordingly, when the plane took off, just minutes before Concorde did on the same runway, the wear strip fell off. As Concorde accelerated over this sharp bit of metal at high speed, it punctured Concorde's tire, causing rubber to spin off the wheel and break open the fuel tank. This led to a fuel leak, which in turn led to a fire, resulting in one of Concorde's engines being shut down. The speed it was going, it was committed to take off, but it couldn't gain enough velocity or altitude to remain in the air. There had been problems with Concorde before, such as part of a rudder breaking off in a 1989 flight, but never a crash. The system had always worked. The pilots, in the heat of the moment, had always realized how to save the plane. The ground crew never made any major mistakes. By 2003, Concorde was permanently grounded. This seems to me to be an example of declining intelligence right there. It was not a problem with the Concorde that caused the fatal disaster. And the Concorde company wasn't responsible for it. It was Continental Airlines which was responsible for it. But Concorde gets grounded permanently in 2003. Now, 1969 was also the year that we put a man on the moon. In many ways, this may be the greatest achievement in the history of humanity to date. This was not something that developed organically and unplanned. 1958, the Americans got into the space race, and just 11 years later, on July the 20th, 1969, there was a man on the moon. Now, there were 5 further manned flights until December 1972. But we carried on dreaming of exploring the stars until the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986. The shuttle exploded just after launch because one of the rocket's O-rings had malfunctioned due to recent cold weather. Potential problem with O-rings had been identified in 1971, but had never been addressed And it was only the severe cold combined with this failure that led to the crash. Caution would have dictated abandoning the launch due to the freezing conditions. Financial considerations dictated otherwise. Confidence in manned space travel had been damaged. The space program, in terms of serious leaps, like getting people to Mars, began to stagnate. A couple of things about that. The reason that the O-ring failed was because they had replaced the O-ring with a new design shortly before. Why was that? Because the old O-ring had asbestos in it. But who cares? Who cares? Well, NASA cared. Oh, we're asbestos-free. Challenger disaster? Well, this was a publicity stunt. And they put a civilian woman on board, a teacher, Krista McAuliffe. And America's children were subjected in the many millions to this horrifying event in their schools. And so, you see, to postpone it would have taken the bloom off the rose of this publicity stunt. That when Eisenhower, this is described in Tom Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff, that when the space program, the US space program began under Eisenhower, he decided he'd got all sorts of advice that only military men would take part. And that was a very wise decision. It means no lawsuits. These are experimental flights. Of course, subsequent disasters, they started putting civilians in there, and well, now you get all these lawsuits, as if these people didn't understand that flying in space was dangerous. So the authors ask why. Why is it that we used to be able to fly from the USA to London in less than 4 hours, but now we can't? Why is it that we used to be able to put people on the moon, but now it seems we can't? The answer is surprisingly simple. We are no longer intelligent enough to be able to do these things. We've become too stupid to keep Concorde in flight, let alone go back to the moon. Now, the idea of the world getting better, there's been a revolutionary change in this. For someone of my generation, people talked a lot about things like colonies on the moon. At Stanley Kubrick's 2001, there's a Hilton hotel. And things thought big thoughts about technological change. It's all, small now. It's all about apps and the like. And this kind of romantic vision of a technological future has been lost. I think that the fact that, the Concorde worked and then was shut down, that the moon landing program worked but was shut down, this is much more distressing, I suppose, to older people than to younger people. I don't know that they appreciate the significance of this. But of course, there's this new movie, Apollo 11, and there's a increasing amount of interest in the space program. So maybe that will change. Now, the book is written in a style where objections are raised to the hypotheses stated therein, and then these objections are dealt with. For instance, don't be stupid. There are so many complex reasons why we haven't been back to the moon. And in their list, then they are listed, and the authors declare their loyalty to Occam's razor. The simplest theory is the best. And the simplest theory for why no more moon landings, no more Concorde, is that people are stupider than they used to be. Now, intelligence. What is intelligence? And why is it important? Well, let's see. Intelligence is basically the ability to solve complex problems and do so quickly. The quicker you can solve a problem, the cleverer you are. The cleverer you are, the more complicated the problem has to be before you're stumped. On adult samples, intelligence is 0.8 heritable, meaning that 80% of the variation among individuals is due to genetic factors, whereas a heritability of 1 would indicate that 100% of the variation was genetic. Socioeconomic status is strongly connected with intelligence. It correlates strongly with it. Of Correlation is a measure of the degree to which the change in one variable predicts the change either positively or negatively in a second variable. The key measure captured by correlations is the percentage of variance, which is simply the value of the correlation squared. Correlations are scaled from -1 to 1. A correlation of 0 indicates no association, so 0.7 is a strong positive correlation, indicating the variables share almost 50% of the variance in common. Salary correlates with intelligence at 0.3, while intelligence correlates with education level at 0.5. And intelligence correlates with how well you do at school at 0.7. These are very strong correlations. Now, Darwinian selection acting on intelligence hasn't ended, still going on, the authors argue. Between the 1400s and the mid-19th century, in every generation, the richer 50% of the population had more surviving children than the poorer 50%. This is essentially the central argument of the book, that people are getting stupider because stupid people are outbreeding smart people. Stupid people did not have the ability to outbreed smart people in the past because typically they did not live as long as smart people did. That longevity was at one time strongly correlated to intelligence, if not least for the reason that intelligence is correlated to wealth, and wealthy people can protect themselves against certain things far more than not wealthy people. Now, furthermore, smart people have stopped having children. There are all sorts of reasons for that. One of the most important being feminism and the education, particularly for women. The connection is very strong between the amount of years of education and the lack of offspring. So education, the resulting low death rate of children from the Industrial Revolution, its innovations in medicine and hygiene, such as widespread use of inoculations against formerly killer diseases, in addition to social initiatives aimed at alleviating the effects of poverty, the welfare state. Now, this question of lowering intelligence and the rise of the lower classes, the authors explain in the book that Francis Galton and others have been concerned about this for quite a long time. Now, you mentioned Galton today, and someone will say eugenics, and then someone will say the Nazis, and that shuts down that conversation. There's some places like Alberta, where I used to live, the government had a policy of sterilizing profoundly stupid people. This is it's regrettable, but no one is in favor of that sort of thing nowadays. People believe in eugenics, overwhelmingly believe in eugenics. You can see that by the people that they marry. Given a choice, people will choose to marry good-looking, smart people, healthy people. That's what people will choose given the choice. And men will choose to marry younger women because there's more likelihood of healthy children. I mean, that's one of the reasons. The other reasons are obvious. But the book talks about the Flynn effect, which has masked the intelligence decline on IQ tests of the 20th century. The Flynn effect was a rising of intelligence over several decades in the 20th century. Now, it's a controversial subject, but the authors conclude that the Flynn effect was not connected to what is called G, or general intelligence, and this is a fairly common view. So we need to talk about what general intelligence is core cognitive ability. That's one description of it. And the Flynn effect, some people have argued that people just got used to taking tests, that everyone goes to school, and so there's constant test taking, and there has been constant IQ test taking for many decades. And there is a skill to taking tests, and it could be that the Flynn effect simply meant that people were better at taking tests. Some variables associated with general intelligence: achievement motivation, altruism, analytic style, abstract thinking, artistic preference and ability, atheism, craftwork, creativity, healthy diet, democratic participation, educational attainment, eminence and genius, emotional sensitivity, extracurricular attainments, field independence, height, health, fitness, longevity, sense of humor, income, depth and breadth of interests, involvement in school activities, leadership, linguistic abilities, and logical abilities, choice of marital partner, many more. And the authors argue that there are not really different kinds of intelligence. In general, we can understand that some people are more intelligent than others. After talking to somebody, and often after talking to them for not very long, we get an intuitive sense of how bright or smart they are. This can be deceptive in a minority of cases. For example, somebody might be very verbally skilled and use lots of big words, meaning they will superficially appear to be highly intelligent. If anyone has ever seen the late boxing champion Muhammad Ali speak, he was a great speaker. He was fluent. He was making up rhymes and raps, at the time. When he impressed people like Howard Cosell, it turned out that Muhammad Ali had an IQ of 86. Not very bright at all. Just that some people are good. Some people are good at talking. So different types of intelligence, no. I mean, if you look at what, say, Muhammad Ali said, none of it was particularly profound. It was mostly joking stuff and very repetitious. Now, the objection to IQ, there's a moral objection to IQ, and they dismiss this. The illogical argument: science is amoral. Now, this is a very important point. Science is amoral. We seek to understand the world using scientific tools, and sometimes the things that we find out are unpleasant for various reasons. That doesn't make them any less true. The authors write, the possible fact that using IQ tests and measuring intelligence may have negative consequences, let alone that it makes some people feel bad, is completely irrelevant to whether intelligence is a meaningful concept and whether IQ tests fairly measure it. And scientific data indicate that humans have evolved from a common ancestor with chimpanzees, and you believe this knowledge is dangerous or uncomfortable. That has no bearing at all on whether it's true. Anyway, this argument can also be easily turned on its head. If we don't know how intelligent people are, then we will appoint them to professions at random. Accordingly, people who are intellectually incapable of, let's say, designing aeroplanes will be put to work doing so. And the airplanes will crash and people will be killed. We feel rather uncomfortable about that and would suggest it is rather dangerous, except that that already exists, and it's called affirmative action. Another argument against intelligence is that it's a very Western concept. That doesn't mean it's not relevant to understanding what's happening elsewhere. We only really developed the modern definition of intelligence around 1912, but that doesn't mean it's not relevant to understanding people who lived before then. This would be like saying that relativistic and Newtonian physics are irrelevant to understanding cosmological events that happened in deep time before the discovery of these physical laws. As discussed, the most well-known example of alternate intelligence is emotional intelligence. The idea that there are multiple ways in which individuals can be intelligent is emotionally reassuring to some because intelligence is a highly socially valued quality, and it means that everyone can be intelligent in some way. But the emotional reasoning behind the desire for multiple intelligences is akin to the precocious child who sees his little playground gang arguing over who should be the leader and chips in, why can't we all be leaders? If everybody's somebody, then no one's anybody. If everyone's intelligent, then it's akin to everyone being tall. The concept simply becomes meaningless. And more importantly, as we've already discussed, these different kinds of intelligence actually positively correlate with general intelligence. Well, no, you see this as the leveling associated with the great evil of multiculturalism. We saw this grotesque woman being used as a model for Gillette razors. And, who are you to say what beauty is? Well, we know what beauty is. And certainly in the Western world, the ideal of beauty, if you look at Greek statuary, you can see it right there. In fact, science has proved something we already know, that there are experiments with babies, newborn babies, and you show them pictures of people. Some are, these people are considered conventionally attractive and some not. And the experiments have shown that babies spend far more time looking at the people who are good looking. People are attracted to good looking people just as they are attracted to intelligence. Now, it would appear that the intelligence levels in the West, IQ levels in the West, have been going backwards for some time. And well, why is this important? I would argue that we can see the evidence of this in, say, the collapse of popular culture. That it's banal, it's vapid, it's exceedingly repetitive now. It's girlish and wanton, and it seems to be popular entertainment, particularly say music, seems to be aimed at, let's say, a 12-year-old girl. That's the ideal audience now for popular music. That music that had been considered mainstream is now considered art music, and it's only for clever clogs. We can see that in the deterioration of the movies that are made. It's not true that every movie stars people wearing spandex, but more and more movies star people dressed in spandex who fly through the air, because apparently people now no longer have the intellectual capacity to deal with things like human beings and their problems and their emotions. The Graduate in 2001 were big hits in 1968. They would not be big hits today. A movie like The Graduate would have a hard time even being made. That it just seems another thing in that regard. This idea of high culture and low culture and mid cult. There was an understanding that there were works of art and the like, or works of history that were neither highbrow nor lowbrow. They were in the middle. That they were designed for a broad popular audience. Well, mid-cult has pretty much disappeared in the West. Immigration is touched on in the book. The final factor that is reducing average intelligence in developed countries is by far the most controversial. That factor is immigration from less developed countries. It would usually be a factor that we wouldn't mention, or at least we would be extremely careful to whom we mentioned it, for fear of people becoming offended or even physically violent towards us. One problem with science, which many people find difficult to get their heads around, is that the aim of science is to understand the nature of the world and to present the simplest explanation based on the evidence for what is going on. Science is not there to be reassuring, to make people feel good, or to help bond society together. There are some researchers who have argued that there should be a moral dimension to science, and that therefore some findings that upset people or make their lives difficult should be suppressed, or such uniquely high levels of proof should be demanded before they can be disseminated that they should be effectively be suppressed. This is a problematic argument because until that stage is reached, we could be developing policy based on a false hypothesis, and this in turn may lead to seriously damaging consequences for society. It would be unforgivably intellectually dishonest of us to censor this issue, particularly considering the substantial body of academic research on it. And what does this show? Well, it shows that immigration, the West is accepting large numbers of immigrants from countries with low IQ. Now, if you have obviously if you have an average IQ of 100, say, and then 50% of your population is made up of people coming from countries with IQ, say, of 80, well, it's obvious that this is going to result in a significant drop in the overall IQ. There are different average differences in intelligence between different ethnic groups of Western countries. Northeast Asian, what in the old days would have been called Oriental immigrants, are the most intelligent. They are more intelligent than Europeans, and they have an average IQ of 105. Europeans have an average IQ of 100. Immigrants from South Asia and the Middle East have an average IQ of about 90. Immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean have an average IQ of about 85. It cannot realistically be argued that IQ tests are unfair towards immigrant children. Northeast Asians perform better on them than Europeans. Immigrant children perhaps the best on the least G-loaded parts of the IQ test, even when the tests are stripped of parts that could be considered to be culturally biased, such as the vocabulary scale, which will unfairly penalize those for whom English is not their primary language. So let us turn to what is happening using the example of Denmark. Emil Kierkegaard is a Danish researcher who began his career by doing a degree in linguistics. Indeed, his bachelor's thesis looks at the exciting issue of Danish spelling reform. However, tiring of the academic quiet life, Kierkegaard has turned to the academic hot potato of group differences in IQ. Based on information from Statistics Denmark, he has shown two important things. Firstly, non-Western immigration in Denmark has risen substantially between 1980 and 2012 on an almost continuous upward trajectory. In 1980, 50,000 non-Western immigrants were living in Denmark. In 2012, 300,000 non-Western immigrants were living in Denmark. Secondly, drawing upon published Danish Army conscript data, he showed that if we set the average IQ of Danes at 100, then the average IQ of non-Western immigrants is roughly 86. And this corresponds exactly to the white-black IQ difference in the United States. He cites studies showing that in many different Western countries, a comparable distance exists between the native population and immigrants, at least when putting aside immigrants from Northeast Asia. He argues that this difference is substantially genetic in origin because in England, for example, it has been shown to develop by a very young age among second-generation non-Western immigrants. It also fits with studies that show average differences in IQ between countries. One issue that Kierkegaard does not look at is differential fertility between Danes and non-Western immigrants in Denmark. As of 2012, non-Western immigrants in Denmark produce an average of 1.8 children per couple, whereas this is 1.69 for ethnic Danes. Now, it seems to be fairly obvious that there are many reasons why politicians, the media, everyone does not want to talk about the IQ of immigrants to the West. Because one of the arguments for justifying this transformation in our countries is that we need these people. We need these people because someone has to pay for our pensions, that our own declining fertility means that, we need people from foreign countries. If these people are a standard deviation less intelligent than the people who are already here, which appears to be the case, then it's clear that the economic argument is completely bogus, which has been demonstrated in the United States by a research from George Borjas and in Canada by research from the Fraser Institute. So, then they have to go back to diversity, or that, somehow we owe it to the world for the world to come here. Now, I think that this book is quite valuable, that it explains the IQ issue quite simply, but there's a wealth of detail of all different sides, facets of the IQ question, and its history, and in making the case that we really should care. We really should care about the decline of intelligence, because intelligence is better than stupidity. That would seem to be pretty easy to understand, but I don't know. In a multicultural world, who's to say whether intelligence, or what intelligence it is, or whether it is in fact superior to stupidity? Now, if this trend is not reversed, there are things that we're going to see happening. And we're going to see a lot more incidents like this Concorde crash. We're going to see a collapse of infrastructure, because people will be appointed to jobs that they are not qualified for, and they do not really have the commitment to these jobs. They just don't care very much. Higher intelligence is associated with higher conscientiousness, but in a society where we need certain people in certain jobs for political reasons, this is dangerous. I mean, I've talked about how amusing I find the education profession, PhDs in education, that the book claims that the average IQ of education PhDs is, I believe, 117, which is just above one standard deviation. I don't believe that, certainly not based on Professor Crunk and all of these other people who are in the news every day. I mean, this should be a scandal. This should be a worldwide scandal, that we are now producing PhDs who really shouldn't be graduating with BAs. But apparently, the concept of the idea of intelligence and importance is now such a controversial topic that we're not allowed to talk about it. But this book by Edward Dutton and Michael Woodley does, and I recommend it. I recommend it because of the importance of the ideas expressed, but also that, as opposed to, say, the bell curve, it is not recondite and is written in a way that is easy to understand. Anyway, those are my thoughts.